Look at this hair. 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 Braid my hair and change the weather. Isis priestess, do it better. Midwife, doula, herbal healer, cosmic purpose, gets no real love. Cosmic purpose gets no real love. 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 So did you ever get your hair done and they spun you around in the mirror and you were like, look at this hair. I am a whole fucking goddess. Hair. Look at this 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 hair. You wanna stare? Look at this hair. Look at this hair. Look at this hair. Yeah. Mommy, you look good. Straight out the hood. Mommy, you look fine. Hair so divine. Feet on point, wig on point, lashes on point, brows on point, ass on point, ass on point. Drip, 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 drip. Girl, you annoying. Beauty is my medicine. Body con unfettered and boundaries on fleek, unbothered by the fuck shit I've inherited. Well, okay, I'm bothered, but that shit don't stop a bitch. Not your superwoman, but I am your goddess. That's right, you can't touch this. Nah, you can't fuck this. No is my favorite word, diamond crusted cutlass. Look at this hair. 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 You wanna stare? Look at this hair. 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 Short, neon, green or pink, Caesar locks, box braids, ink, lock it, twist it, swing it around your hips and enjoy your body, enjoy your body. Braid my hair and change the weather. Isis, priestess, do it better. Midwife, doula, herbal, healer, cosmic purpose, get no realer. Lavender and sage the built-in chakra plants from Florida, still and creatively, sexually, spiritually, 1 in a million, not 1 in a billion, not 1 in a trillion. Infinity shooting star, moon like a gazillion. Infinity shooting star, moon like a gazillion. Infinity shooting star, moon like a gazillion. I said moon like a gazillion. This is my pavilion. This is my fucking century. You don't have to pray for me. You can pray to me, bitch.
Look at this hair. Look at this hair. Look at this hair.
You will not touch my hair. You will not fuck with my hair. You will not dare. My aura feel not a tear. I'm the princess of Bel-Air. Queen say hell yeah. You will not touch my hair. You will not fuck with my hair. You will not dare. My aura feel not a tear. I'm the princess of Bel-Air. Queen say hell yeah. Queen say hell yeah. Queen say hell yeah, hell yeah, hell yeah. Yes. Do we have any Brooklyn queens in the building? Hey. We got any queens in the building? We got any Harlem queens in the building? Yes. Who that is? Bronx queens in the building? Staten Island queens in the building? No? Okay. We got any, I didn't say it. We got any Philly queens in the building? Ow. Yes. Okay, cool. We got these beautiful queens in the building. Yes. I am Isis. This is Jack. This is Serena. We are representing my project called Priestess of Twerk, a Black femme temple to pleasure and wisdom school. It is a constellation of events, which you'll hear about when I'm on the panel later, probably, but a live spa and temple, a ritual opera, and a series of healing engagements that center Black women, femmes, and gender nonconforming folks. So that's what we're about, that's what we're doing. Cause you know, this place is kind of fucked up, you know? America is a very colonizing place, right? Does anybody feel colonized by America in here? Just like a lot, right? Just every fucking day, right? At every moment, yeah. So, you know, that's the song, but also, right, this song is a reminder that it is our duty to be expansive. It is our duty to remember our magnificence and our greatness, even and in spite of all that tries to keep us in forgetting, in the mode of forgetting. And so, yeah, it's a dance hall track, but we're doing it acoustic because look what we've got here, right? Our Afrocentric strings. Yes. Shall we? Hey. Ting-a-ling-a-ling, Black girls sing. America, America, so colonizing. Ting-a-ling-a-ling, Black girls sing. America, America, so. I give it to you raw. I had to break the law, wave my hair back and forth just to unbreak my heart. I give it to you raw. I had to break the law, wave my hair back and forth just to. Ting-a-ling-a-ling, Black girls sing. America, America, so colonizing. Ting-a-ling-a-ling, Black girls sing. America, America, so. Lonely and broken hearted, wave my hair to get free. When I see my sisters weep, poetry ain't a luxury. Apocalyptic times, still casting in my rhymes. First there was the word, and my voice resounds like chimes. I sing for all the ones who said bygones are bygones, who lost their life to guns, left behind motherless sons. I don't carry Glocks, and I don't carry weight. My weight carries many to change our fate. There's a fire in your heart, gotta feed it. There's a scroll in your sight, gotta read it. There's a ghost in your ear, yeah, you need it. There's an altar by your bed, gotta heed it. Ting-a-ling-a-ling, Black girls sing. America, America, so colonizing. Ting-a-ling-a-ling, Black girls sing. America, America, so. Ting-a-ling-a-ling, Black girls sing. America, America, so colonizing. Ting-a-ling-a-ling, Black girls sing. America, America. I am a star, yeah, I got bars. No, I'm I'm not famous, want my 40 acres. You don't really know where I come from. Philly, Philly, gullah, 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 Turkish Indian. Black is the color of my true love's hair. The suffering gets so bad, it's sometimes hard to bear. We have to be brave, we have to be bold, we have to be strong. Water baptize my soul. I come from the sun and I come from the sky. I come from the eagle, look now I can fly. I come from the bottom, I come from the sea. I mean it when I say, you all know me. Unless you see rainbows and auras and shit. Unless you are willing to release the whip. Mentality strangling my people soul to soul. Trauma bonding, calling it love. I think it's getting old. I come from the galaxy, I come from black holes. They might have sold this body, but my spirit is old. Multiply for generations, I'm a truth to playing games. Ha 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 ha, I'm an eternal flame. Ting-a-ling-a-ling, black girls sing. America, America, so colonizing. Ting-a-ling-a-ling, black girls sing. America, America, so ting-a-ling-a-ling, black girls sing. America, America, so colonizing. Ting-a-ling-a-ling, black girls sing. America, America, so I come from the land and I come from the sea. Ha 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 ha, I'm infinity. I'm infinity, yeah, I'm infinity. I'm infinity, yeah, I'm infinity. Blessings on my head, blessings on my feet. Never, never forget, my ancestors got me. Blessings on my head, blessings on my feet. Never, never forget, my ancestors got me. My ancestors got me, yeah. My ancestors got me, My ancestors got me.
Wave my hand back and forth just to unbreak my heart. I get too raw. I had to break the law. Wave my hand back and forth just to unbreak my heart. Ting-a-ling-a-ling, black girl sing. America, America, so colonizing. Ting-a-ling-a-ling, black girl sing. America, America, so.
Let's give it up, another round of applause for Isis, the priestess of twerk, and her band. You know, day that the goddess of fertility descends from ancient Kemet to bless the proceedings. So I don't know about you, but I'm feeling very blessed right now and very grateful. Welcome to the first queer hip hop cypher at the Park Avenue Armory. My name is Tavia Nyong'o, and I'm curator of public programs at the Armory, and I want to welcome everyone in the room and those of you watching on the live stream. We are gathered here today on Lenape-Hoking, aka New York City, the traditional territory of the Munsee Lenape, and home to the largest urban population of First Nations on Turtle Island, aka North America. I think Eshu Elegba is also in the house, so we have some technology. We offer respect, gratitude, and care for the Native peoples, past, present, and future, who have been and continue to be stewards of these lands and waters. So, dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to celebrate this thing called hip-hop. Electric word hip-hop, it means so many things to so many heads, but I'm here to tell you there's something else, the Cypher. So welcome to the Cypher. Today we gather to celebrate and further an art form that is indelibly rooted in New York, one that has grown into a culture that gives voice to the voiceless all around the globe. As we step into the Cypher, we join a circle that goes all the way back to the ring shout, a black spiritual and musical technology that has survived the Middle Passage from Africa. As we step into the Cypher, we get ready to enter the black healing portal that Krudex Kabenzi's in the house, give it up for Krudex Kabenzi. The black healing portal that Krudex Kabenzi has prepared in Oakland, in Cuba, in everywhere in the diaspora of the diaspora, as they say, where creativity is a form of faith. To quote Shanté Paradigm Smalls, black here is not an afterthought, a curse, or a limitation. It is the cosmos itself, the blue-black existence from which all other forms emerge. I ask you to read the program where so many who contributed their creativity and passion to this day are named and thanked. And I invite you, those of you who are gathered here in person, to step into the film room down the hall where many of the artists here today have moving image work on view all day. Let us thank Rebecca Robertson in the house and the entire Park Avenue Armory staff for making space for this precious chance to dialogue, spit rhymes, honor ancestors, and honor each other and ourselves. Let us thank Lee Rayford, also in the house somewhere, I think, Tiana Paschal and the Black Studies Collaboratory at University of California, Berkeley, a project funded by the Mellon Foundation for their visionary partnership. Let us also thank my colleagues Darian, Maria Fernanda, Claire, and Davison, who worked overtime, literally, to make this day possible. I invite you to consider this a day where we can experience utopia in the present, as queer of color theorist Jose Esteban Munoz often called for. As Munoz also said, shouting down utopia is an easy move. And just yesterday, 10 people were slain in Buffalo in a black neighborhood, including Pearlie Young, age 77, who was shopping for groceries for a food pantry that she ran every Saturday in Central Park. Pearlie Young loved singing, dancing, and being with her family. And when we talk about food justice, as we just heard upstairs from the Soulfire Farm, she is the person that we mean. So in honor of Pearlie Young and the others injured in Buffalo, I'd ask for a moment of silence. Thank you. We know all too well the forces arrayed against us. We know intimately the forces that oppose just futures and abolition democracy. But a utopia in the present can be a portal into another kind of knowledge. Here, to kick that conversation up, is none other than hip-hop scholar and dharma teacher Shanté Paradigm Smalls, who will moderate our opening panel with MC and artist Ms.Boogie. Most recently featured in Rashad Newsom's Assembly, I think they're coming on now. Jason King, chair of the Clive Davis School of Recorded Music at NYU. Tim M. West, OG educator, poet, youth advocate, and hip hop artist. And we'll welcome back to the stage Nia O. Witherspoon, the Priestess of Twerk. Please welcome everyone. I invite you.
I'm sitting next to you.
Thank you so much, Tavia. And all of the Park Avenue Armory folks who made this happen. Particularly, I want to give a shout out to Maria Fernanda and Darian just for answering so many questions and Zoom calls. Thank you all for being here, both in person and in virtual space. And so let's have a conversation. Tim M.T. West, Ms.Boogie, Dr. Jason King, Shanté Paradigm Smalls, Nia will join us at some point. So I guess the first question I'd like to ask, and any of you feel free to jump in on it. When you think of queer hip hop performance, where do you see yourself, or how do you locate yourself inside that broad, those broad categories of queer hip hop performance?
Well, since I was just called an OG, I guess maybe I should start. I think about, and we were talking a little earlier about sort of mid to late 90s and an array of articles that were coming out. One in particular, I think Wendy Williams was associated with, one that magazine. It was sort of like, who is the gay rapper? And it was this sort of speculative article that someone in hip hop who was really well known and good was actually secretly gay. But I think that piece did a different thing, right? For queer and trans b-boys around the world, it was kind of a call out, right? Because here we were having this debate about who the gay rapper could be when there already existed people that were doing ciphers on city corners and writing rhymes. And I think that very article, that very speculative nature of, wow, like if there was a gay rapper, they would never tell anyone, was kind of a call to action for so many of us. And I think that, for me, was kind of an opportunity to say, hey, here's an opportunity to step into hip hop as someone who was out and to speak my truth using hip hop as a medium. But I also always want to acknowledge that even prior to late 90s, when there was a kind of codified queer hip hop sort of movement, that there were people from the very beginnings of hip hop who were queer and trans, even if they weren't calling it that at the time.
Thank you. Ms.Boogie, did you want to speak to that?
Yes. The question again?
So how do you, or where do you locate yourself inside of this thing we're calling today queer hip hop performance?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I think that a lot of my work in particular is about deconstructing the grouping of what queer hip hop really is. I think that the way I got to witness it in media was kind of like a hot term or like a hot topic, right? But I knew that there were people way before me that simply identified as queer and just so happened to rap. And I think that goes to speak about like everything that queer people are capable of, right? Like it's like we're construction workers, we're doctors, we're rappers, we're anything you can think of, right? So a lot of my work in particular is about just, again, deconstructing the title and dismantling the expectations of how a queer rapper should show up as, what they should talk about, how they should dress, and the sensationalism around being queer. Yeah.
Thank you. Jason.
It's my turn.
It's your turn.
I mean, I don't think I'm not a hip hop performer in any way. It's just something I've been studying for a very long time and thinking about for a long time. And so your book was this like incredible occasion for me to just rethink my own history with all of this and go back to thinking about New York City specifically. Yeah. This is my 30th year in New York City. Wow, so just thinking about all that I've seen and all that I've been a part of during that time, it took me back into some dark places. no, some good places.
Literally dark.
Literally dark places. No, it was all good. But you know, I think of hip hop as being always already queer. Yeah. As a form, as a you know, omni-genre. I don't know if you can call it a genre because it includes all other genres. So I think of it as a kind of omni-genre that was always already queer in terms of its style, in terms of its structure, in terms of its approach, in terms of the people who were part of it. That's not to say everybody was queer, but there were a lot of queer people from the beginning. And one of the things your book has reminded me of is the idea that we were always already there. Mm. We were, like, queer people were always already a part of hip hop. And your book is a rememorization of that fact, right? Like we're thinking again about that history and placing ourselves at the center of that history and the foundational aspect of that history. And so this is not new, I think, to hip hop, right? Like, you know, I was just writing on my page, like all of the, like if you look at queer jazz and blues, I mean, there's Strayhorn, there's Bessie Smith, there's like a whole long history there. If you look at rock and roll, immediately you'll find Little Richard, you'll find Escorita, you'll find R&B singers like Billy Wright, who were the inspiration for the Elvises and the James Browns and everyone else. You can go to 60s bohemian rock and roll, and right there is Sylvester and the Pointer Sisters in the Bay Area doing like a Leonard Cohen cover on the Lights Up San Francisco album. You know, like you go to the 80s and there's Luther Vandross at the center of, you know, the construction of all of the Quiet Storm heterosexual romantic fantasy, right? It's like an ongoing history. So why would it be a surprise that queer folks are in hip hop, or that queer folks have been instrumental to the development of the aesthetics of hip hop itself, which is, I think, where you're going with it. So it's something I've been thinking about for a long time, and then also just thinking about how it has changed and how it's developed over time. Because the 80s, well, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, 2010s, and now in the 2020s, these are very different decades, very different moments, very different times, impacted by a lot of internal and external forces. And it's really interesting to think about how what we might call queer hip hop performance has changed over time and how it's been impacted by all of the kind of, swirling forces that have determined its existence and its presence.
Thank you. Well, I know, Nia, Isis. Nia, okay, you're now Nia. I don't know if you want to jump in, just having done a performance. I was just asking us to think about where do you locate yourself inside, or do you locate yourself inside of this broad field called queer hip hop performance?
So, Kosa, just going in with a small question.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's about an orientation to pleasure. And, I definitely, because I've just identified, to use our dear Godfather's term, Jose Munoz's term, because I've just identified with hip hop for so long, hip hop has always been so queer for me. Like, hip hop has just always been queer. And so, like, the folks who who inspire Isis and who inspire the kind of work that I'm doing in hip hop and the kind of interventions that I'm hoping to make are, in some ways, like bringing more to the surface things that already exist, and queering them in that sense, like bringing the subterranean dynamics present and forward. I oftentimes cite this story of being at Black Pride in Atlanta in the early 2000s, and it was a time. It was a time, right? And like, certainly a really formative time for me in my queer hip hop consciousness. Like I remember we waited outside to Tweet was performing, and Missy was like in the front, because and so at the time they say whatever. So we were like we waited for hours, and finally Missy came out, but she did not come out with Tweet. She came out with arm, like flanked by maybe 2 or 3 gorgeous stilettoed femmes on either side. And it was this grand procession. It was like this regalia, like this, and it's just so funny because everyone's like, Missy's been in the closet for all this time and all this stuff. And I was just like, no. I mean, aside from, her, if you do a deep analysis of her lyrics, it's just simply not true. But also, which I did, published in Journal of Popular Culture back when I used to identify as an academic. But no, for real though. So I just told you the opening paragraph of the paper. But for real though, there's something really exciting about like the things that we've always known, like being the thing. Like now it's like we don't have to really. Not that there's not excitement in like trafficking in secrets and trafficking in like in inner cultures, and I think like some of that certainly. It still exists, but like I think I think I retain a certain nostalgia for that, and so I'm always asking myself as an artist, like, what secrets am I telling? Like, what should stay inside of the community? And even with Priestess of Twerk, the work that I referred to, like, a lot of it is like the audience will only be Black femmes for a lot of the audience, Black and brown femmes, right? And so like. What do we keep sacred? Because I think that this moment right now, I'm coming of age as a hip hop artist, a little late, into this moment where like, yeah, everything is kind of feels more open and free, and yet we still have all of the external violences, like all the things that made hip hop come of age in the first place. Like that, like the violences are still so present, and yet those are more like shielded, and yet like it appears that we're in this era of like openness and like free for all, because there's like Lil Nas X and like, you know what I mean? Like Big Frida, and that's wonderful, and it's an incredible moment to come of age into, but at the same time, I just think like, I'm really curious about like staying relevant and staying present inside of an underground culture. While also like being able to make my work. And for me, I think what that's meant is just like, and I'm closing this now, but for me, I think what that's meant is just like circulating in more like experimental art spaces, I think, than like circulating as much in like
the industry.
This is great. This brings me to my next question, which is thinking about like our collective and individual and interpersonal journey as artists. Everyone on this panel is an artist, and as thinkers too, as activists, as critics. And what like when you think, we were talking a little bit about earlier upstairs about going to the warehouse in the Bronx in the early 2000s, and we didn't know if we were going to get killed. It was like you had to go under a train thing and then past a strip club, and then it was dark, and then there was this gigantic black hip hop club in South Bronx. But what do you feel has or some of the things that you notice have changed with your art, with your criticism, with your thinking, as I think all of us are Gen X and millennials, as you've gotten older and as you've, as time has gone on, what are some of the things that like stand out to you as having changed or having, or that you want to emphasize now or that you're interested in? Anyone?
I don't know if a lot of, I try to approach kind of like the craft and hip hop as like the collective and the society with as minimal expectations as I wish it would have on me, right? So the hope for change has definitely like, I don't know if I want to say it diminished or I don't.
Like the hope for like to be a big star,
right? Like this. Well, no, not for me, but like this big breakthrough in like queer hip hop, right? Where it's just like it becomes, it surfaces just as much as any other talent. So I guess it feeds off of kind of the idea of a Little Nas X and a Big Frida. I think that I'm very happy with where it is now, but my wish is the opportunity in this space for people to, I guess, care about a queer artist that's like, also it doesn't matter about like how flamboyant they are or how visibly queer they are, it's just more about like the topics and the range that we can cover, right? Yeah. So for me it's like I still want my Black trans Lauryn Hill, right? Like I still want my somebody as powerful, but in that space, right? In that queer space, or received as prolific, right? So when I think about it drives me to think about like topics and content about like the way I write, where it's like, of course I can talk about the things that are immediate to me or are super visible or just tangible or in between me and like the cis-het hip-hop community so that they can catch on to it, I guess, or be as general as possible. But like I also have like some deep things that I want to talk about, right? Like I also have the Kendrick Lamar spirit. I also, as a lyricist, like I want to talk about things that aren't sometimes glittery and fabulous and all the sass that people relate to like queerness. Yes. And I want to be able to do that in hip hop and just be respected as an artist, right? So when I think about the change, I think about range. Like the range of what people are willing to dive into within like queer hip hop, or people that are outputting queer art.
And do you feel like you as an artist, you have your range has expanded as you've been performing for longer?
Yes, I mean I've always had the desire to be like, I think what's radical about hip hop, or what attracts me to hip hop, is the ability to kind of like remove your cloak and like, just be amongst within that conversation where it's like, if I talk about it, I know you'll talk about it too, right? And we're just like passing the conversation around. So I've always had that desire, but I think that now it's a lot more intentional, right? Where it's like I'm going to talk about everything that I want to talk about because my time on this earth is like getting like smaller and smaller. So I definitely feel more of an urge now. But I don't feel like we should have to feel, kind of like attracted to that idea of like, I have to be prolific in order to be taken serious, or I have to speak about certain things in order to be respected. But I think, my range has definitely, it's matured, it's changed. But again, I don't want to ostracize anybody who doesn't get it, but I also want to make sure that people like me get it first, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd say, when you Ms.Boogie talk about range, I think about sort of my relentless commitment to Black freedom and Black joy. And I think of that in the context of industry as why I've always kind of been skeptical about stepping into industry in a white supremacist culture that will necessarily try to dictate how you show up, right? And so one of the reasons I entered hip hop was the ability to talk about experiences that I was not hearing in mainstream hip hop. And many of those experiences, I think people in mainstream hip hop would have talked about if not being told that like it needs to show up this way, you need to show up this way. Even to the degree of being told by industry heads in the late 90s when I first started to sort of peak in the hip hop that I wasn't showing up queer enough, right? That if you're going to be a queer hip hop artist, that like you look just like the other hip hop guys in Brooklyn. And I'm like, because a lot of the hip hop guys in Brooklyn look like me, right? Like there's no difference, but you know, can you queer it up a little bit, right? Which for me is like, you know, this sort of performative gesturing of queerness in a way that in my mind would mock people who live lives as non-binary trans individuals is not something I find jokeable, right? And that I wanted boys like myself who grew up playing football and basketball, but who liked the boys that they played football and basketball with.
Okay.
Right.
Look good in them uniforms, Lokar.
Exactly. To see a reflection of themselves. And I think the biggest compliment to my work, which is a compliment to Marlon Riggs and Essex Hempel, whose Tongues Untied really brought me out of the closet, was that, wow, that there is a way in which we are sort of being called into that freedom and joy, right? And to claim that and to not compromise that, like based on industry standards.
So I just had this memory as you both were talking. There was this moment when maybe it was 2002, 2003, and maybe we were filming Pick Up the Mic, which some of you may know. It's showing in the film room. Tim and I, many others are in it. And there was this moment where there was a lot of interest from mainstream, not necessarily music places, although I had some meetings with Sony, but HBO, and then MTV they were putting together a show about queer hip hop artists living together. I was like, I don't know how that's gonna go. And I remember thinking, oh, right, if I do this, then anything I wanna actually do is going to kind of go out the window because I've got to follow the dictates of the breadcrumbs that these folks lay down. And it made sense that the conversations I had with other people, like my older brother who's in here, and other people who had turned down major label contracts, was because it wasn't like, oh, I'm such a pure artist, I don't want to compromise, but it was actually asking you to live a life you didn't want to live. Mm-hmm. And I think that sometimes, when I think about what's changed for me, is like I just like wanted to be famous. I just like wanted to be a star. I wanted to be on stage, and I think now what's really interesting to me is Black liberation, right? And is Black Thought, the rapper, but also who also has a new album out. It's not just Kendrick Lamar with a new album, but
and is an OG.
Who is OG. But is like the critical thinking that Black people of all like levels, all ranges, all ways of life do. I'm really interested in the way that Black people think, across the diaspora. So I think that's also something that's been coming back to me, is like being really interested in how we formulate the world that a lot of times is against us.
But it's also interesting because there was this moment where the idea was if there could be a Black queer hip-hop performer who could go mainstream, that would be the freedom. That suddenly it would break open the gates, and then everybody could follow. I mean, I didn't believe that, but that's what a lot of people were of that belief. And it just also makes me think, if we go back to figures who try to negotiate that kind of dangerous crossing, people like Michelle Ndegeocello, who continually gets written out of all of these histories. That's right. Who is an artist who, in her first album, Plantation Lullabies, in 1992, was it 3 maybe? She's signed to the Maverick label, right, to Madonna's label, Warner. So this is like a big opportunity, and that first album was considered to be hip hop in some ways, even though she came out of the spoken word world, and I don't know if she would have defined herself that way, but she could. She was kind of protean, right? And she could move through different styles and genres and so on. And she never got limited to that tag, and she did other kinds of albums. So Peace Beyond Passion, Grace, there's all kinds of different records that she was able to do. And then she came back to it with the Cookie album in the early 2000s, which was like her hip-hop album in some ways. But just thinking of all of these figures over time who have contributed to the narrative of what we call hip-hop, queer hip-hop performance. And I do think you have to look at someone like Frank Ocean, right? And what happened with Frank Ocean, because that opened up this space for what I would call the like post-closet queer black overground, where suddenly it was possible to have a mainstream major label career as a black queer musician whose work interfaced with hip hop in a way that I don't think was really possible before. And that was a massive kind of sea change in so many ways, but it wasn't like there was hundreds and hundreds of queer, black folks storming the charts everywhere. It was still very much a kind of, limited by gatekeepers. But Lil Nas X is an incredibly unique figure on so many levels, and who's bringing together and who has synthesized all kinds of different traditions and disciplines and approaches and styles, who's a marketing genius as well as a musical genius. But one of the, to go back to your original question, the reason I bring him up, and even Frank Ocean, is I think one of the major changes when we talk about how queer hip hop performance has developed or undeveloped over the years is the rise of social media.
Yeah.
And I think your book stops around 2005, if I'm not mistaken, or does it keep going?
2015.
It keeps going. So I'm curious about like that 2005 post moment when social media comes in, because hip hop is so regionalized, it's so associated with place, and place is about authenticity, like where you're from, what street you're from, what city you're from. And then in 2005, with the rise of YouTube and all of these other kinds of apps, it suddenly social media becomes a very different thing. So I think about somebody like Azalea Banks, whose first big song out of the gate, coming out of New York City, is 212, literally the area code of New York City, right? And just thinking about the way in which her career, because I think of her as a musical genius in so many ways, but impacted by social media, that she's in some ways a kind of cautionary tale about the problem of social media and oversharing. And so I think back to the 70s of Africa Bambaataa, who's a deeply problematic figure, who is one of the foundational figures of hip hop, but also has been accused of some extraordinary predatory behavior, sexual assault and so on. What if these folks had social media accounts back in the 70s, back in the 80s? Like, we would be learning so much other stuff, right? And so I think about figures like Azalea Banks, Frank Ocean, Lil Nas X, who's a social media genius in so many ways. Yeah. And just thinking about the way social media has changed the way that we have to talk about queer hip hop performance in the 21st century.
Did you want to add anything, or?
Oh, I was going to answer the other question.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. I'm still switching out of
performance mode. Yeah, I know.
You were great, by the way.
Yeah, it was really
Thank
wonderful.
you. I had fun, but yeah,
Is it the difference between this and this?
I feel like I just, I'm like, I'm having a brain moment. But anyway, I was going to answer the first part of the question about, because I was like, oh, I agree with that. I want to say more. Like, anyway. But I feel like I'm coming from the context of being a playwright. So I write for theater, and I, and as a writer in general, lots of different genres of writing. And one of the things that it feels like what I was coming to notice is that the writing kept getting more and more embodied. Like it started, and I remember one of my mentors in grad school being like, so do you just want them like standing facing each other and like saying these things back and forth? And I'm like, oh yeah, that was a rap battle, it was a battle. Like, and I think that like, so I think the thing that has shifted for me creatively as the landscape has also shifted is kind of this possibility for my existence as a multi-genre writer, inside of hip hop. Like, I don't know that I necessarily saw a space where I could be until maybe the last 5 years or so. And so like, I don't know what this means for the work. Like, certainly it can live as it can live as music, even though there's a whole play, that it comes from. And there's a score and there's a libretto and all the things, But I think that like in terms of thinking about why that is, in terms of the landscape, it kind of reminds me of like, Yeah, in the social media age, there's also, there's this, it's weird because there's, it went from, there's a lot of posturing, right, and authenticity, you know, stuff that happens with hip hop, but also like in this age, there's a lot of like, there's a certain level of like confessionalism that has come of age. And vulnerability with that, you know, Frank Ocean's letter is a great example of that vulnerability. And I think that all of those things, like, I think there's a relationship between that and queerness. Like, I think there's a relationship between that and why we're getting to see at least a couple of like queer artists being in the mainstream, like in terms of success. And I think that does probably have to do with social media. I think it has to do with a kind of it all. So I'm talking with both. I'm going like this because I'm like, you know, there's also a lot of like performativity, like a lot of performed vulnerability, a lot of like, you know, I don't know, folks just saying things that vulnerability is also a commodity, I guess is what I'm saying. But it's also not like, and it can't be contained by, you know, by being a commodity. And so I guess for me, that has meant like, that has looked like a really different orientation with the genre. Cause like, I'm just all about like, I just bare my soul, you know, as a human. And I don't know whether that will lead to any kind of, I don't know whether that will lead to any kind of anything, right? Ever. I never, ever do. And yet, what's coming out of me, the genre that I'm writing in is rap. Like all I'm writing is rap. The past like 2 years or 3 years, and that's from going from writing like all plays, and now I'm writing a play that is rap, right? So I just think I guess I thank all the folks that have been in it for so much longer, and I also thank the landscape. But I also thank those forebears like the Michelle and Degnacellos and the folks that were doing multi-genre work. I'm a musician too and a composer, and so like I also write across, you know, the album is gonna have R&B and opera and prayer chants. I'm an initiate in an Ubungoma tradition, so it's gonna have all the things. And like that multidimensionality that you were speaking to, like, I think that is what has changed for me, but it's not necessarily what has changed in the industry.
Yeah.
You know, like it's just what, I think I just feel I'm in a different place where I feel like more courageous or something. Like I'm just like ready. I'm ready to receive whatever happens from it. I'm ready to find the road for it and walk that road, as opposed to, you know, there was a time when I was like, oh, I'm gonna try to, you know, like take this path or like whatever. And I understand that's also like a measure of being relatively supported as an artist. So like I can do certain things and be like, I'm gonna try this. I'm just gonna try this. No, yeah, everything is rap now. You know, like I can do certain things like that and like not like lose funding or stuff like that. Or who knows, right? Maybe this will be it. Maybe they'll be like, nope, she's done it. Right? Like we're all in a very precarious position. Shit. But yeah.
This is good. I mean, I think, you know, as y'all were talking, I was thinking about how we all contain so much. And for me, one of the things that was happening as I was finishing the book, you know, I came to academia through being an artist. You know, it was my art that made me think, I want to learn more about this world, and I don't have the resources on my own to do that. I want to be trained so I can think about this. And now I really see myself as a protector of hip-hop history and culture, and as an archivist, and as someone who is very interested in learning more. And you know, there is a whole sector of hip-hop that I was thinking a lot about hip-hop gossip, and how some of that gets a little lost in like social media now, but how that's like also a really important part of hip hop that sometimes makes it into the albums. But I really see myself as someone who is very interested, particularly in helping my students and people remember the like through lines, you know, that are really important and that are actually really powerful. So we're about to be out of time to go to Q&A. So I guess I wanted to just, if we could hear really quickly what everyone is working on, or what in relationship to music or criticism. Just, I don't know where we want to start.
I'm still doing hip hop. You know, it's 20-something years. You know, DDC, Deep the Collective, disbanded in 2007, but most of us were kind of like a Wu-Tang of queer hip-hop, if you can think of it that way. Probably 12 or so members in and out of the group over the course of our active years. And I like to sing, so like a lot of my music is also integrating, you know, these sort of gospel-esque hooks. Someone told me that I sounded like the conscious Nate Dogg, which I took as a compliment, you know, singing consciousness so beautiful, you know, with the vibrato. Yeah, so yeah, I'm working on a project with actually a millennial out of the DC area. It's called Gravel and Grit. You can probably find some of our stuff, and it's interesting to have these cross generations of like me, the OG, you know, doing my rap thing, and then this millennial coming in and sort of, and we both sing, and we're both like preacher kids, and we both are dealing with that sort of vulnerability that you talk about. So excited about that, and just having OGs in our world, right? When I was coming up, so many of us thought of like all the older black queer men were dead from HIV, and so many of them had died. And so for me, as a post-protease baby, having the ability to have life-preserving medication and to be able to live long enough where someone said, "Oh, I saw you like when I was a teenager, and you're still here." Like, it's a real beautiful thing.
That's beautiful. I'm working on just being human right now, right?
Hey.
But I also am working on what I guess in theory is my debut album. I've released a few albums in the past, but I would just say that they weren't in my actualized self and intent and body. So I'm working on the album. The album is called The Breakdown, and it's kind of just like breaking down my process, breaking down my perspective in the world and my scope, and kind of just like teaching people, not teaching, but inviting people into the conversation on how I would like to be treated and the repercussions of not treating me accordingly. So,
Okay.
yeah, so.
And when that's coming out this fall?
Yeah, that's coming out this fall. And another thing is kind of just in that same process, in that same vein, is trying to actively make these memories so that I can archive this experience and people can use it as a reference point in the future.
Thank you.
I'm busy with my day job, which is
being human.
Well, that's my life job, as it was. We don't have enough time for that. You know, my day job is I'm chair of the Clive Davis Institute of Recorded Music at NYU, which is a program that I helped found 20 years ago. And I'm really proud of the program, but I'm proud of it because I think it's increasingly become a home where queer students and queer identified or queer friendly students can thrive. So I'm just thinking of the Lil Nas X record Montero, which was executive produced by two of our graduates, and a number of students worked on it. But I'm not taking credit for it. I'm just saying, I'm happy to be part of a place that can produce that kind of work, where that kind of work can come out, can exist. Other than that, in terms of my writing, I think I'm always trying to kind of recuperate the past and really shine a light on figures who deserve more attention from the past. I think I've always been doing that, but that's not just even the past. I think it's also the present, because there's a lot of blind spots, critical blind spots, even in the present. So I'm just thinking of somebody like a Nicki Minaj, who I think when we talk about, hip hop performance today, she's somebody who always gets kind of written out of it in many ways, and shouldn't, because of the contribution that she's made, even to a figure like Lil Nas X, and she was instrumental, I think, to, like, he was a former, Barb, right? So he's somebody who comes directly out of the influence that, he was influenced directly by her. I'm writing on, I wrote recently on Lil Nas X for NPR. I have a new podcast with Spotify that's launching in June, and it's called Sound Barrier, and the first season is on Sylvester.
Oh, wow.
So looking back at his contribution to the popular culture landscape.
All right.
And then a couple of book projects, but one that I'm quite excited about, which is, and it has nothing to do with hip hop necessarily, although all things connect, which is a revisionist biography of Freddie Mercury. So looking at his African and Indian roots in particular, and really rethinking him as a already kind of global figure, because of where he came from and because of his life in early travel. and how that influenced Queen and how that influenced contemporary popular music.
And then just quickly before we go to the Q&A, what are you working on?
You said quickly.
I'm getting signs from you.
Got you. Quickly, I am. I mentioned already. So I'm a recovering academic, and I'm a recovering, and I'm a former sex worker, and so I think that this piece that I'm writing, Priestess of Twerk, A Black Femme Temple to Pleasure, is really a space where both of those genealogies meet. And it is a retelling of Isis's journey to the underworld through the lens of two sex workers who then meet Isis's twin sister, Nephthys, in the underworld and have to like figure out everything, all of the fuck shit. They have to figure it all out together in rap. I'm also working on a series of engagements, really going to different cities and asking what Priestess of Twerk, A Black Femme Temple to Pleasure means there, like what healing is needed here. And so we're going to Chicago next week to begin that relationship. We're doing it in various places all over the country to commune with Black femme communities and just like activate spaces. We're starting with a dream chamber where we are incubating dreams and asking what stands in the way of our dreaming. And then we will go from there. We'll meet again 3 days later and find out what people dreamed. And then everything that we build in Chicago in that place will be based around that constellation of dreams. So that's kind of how we're moving with the project. So there are things that are formed, there are things that are unformed, and then also just really democratizing the wellness industry, like doing interventions in spas and healing centers and all the spaces that allow our bodies to, and our central nervous systems to recover so that we don't die from so many stress-related illnesses, so that we don't die from childbirth and all manner of other things, and just really thinking about what does it look like in an expansive way to expand Black femme life.
Thank you. Wow. With that, we'll go to Q&A. So if you have a question, please come to the mic. Is that what we're asking people to do?
Just want to thank all of you and Tavia for your role in decolonizing this and probably every space you go to. My question is two-part, but they fold into each other, so I think it might be addressed really quickly. They're both historical. And the first part is that, as you were saying, hip-hop, why do you think that hip-hop, of all the quintessentially Black arts, is so vehemently, has such a history of being so vehemently homophobic? It's wrapped into the lyrics almost from day one, and it seems that it's more vocally and demonstratively homophobic. So the second part of that is I'm wondering if there's a memory of anyone of Gen X of this turning point in the late 90s where Vibe magazine took on a white, gay, cis male editor, and the contretemps that came to that. For me, it's almost like the meeting of queerness and Blackness, but not the way you would think embodied in a queer Black artist. So if there is a memory of that, and if you feel that how that history plays into where we are now.
I can answer to the first half of it. I wasn't here for the shift in environment. Wow, y'all laughing. That is not right. Well, no. So I think that is just the like homophobia, the way it shows up in hip hop. I think it bleeds into its members, its consumers, and its producers, right? But I do think that it's just the voice of that majority within the genre. Unfortunately, like I think even the women in hip hop are like inherently homophobic, and I see the microaggressions in some interactions with like super duper like mainstream pop artists now. I wouldn't say pop, but like super duper mainstream like rap artists in the way they engage with the influx of like queer rappers like Santana and Lil Nas X. But it's almost those just conversations that don't have labels or don't have like a dialogue to follow, but we just know that they're present. So I don't know why it is that way, but I do think that it's just it's inherited, and it's kind of just like again like just expired behavior that still exists.
Yeah, I don't think it was actually more homophobic than other genres of music, and I think you can look at other genres, like, you know, there's punk and there's heavy metal, and these are all extremely homophobic. So I think homophobia is something that's endemic in the culture, and it's institutional, and hip hop in some ways reflected that, but I don't think it bears the, you know, responsibility of being the only homophobic or even the most homophobic genre of its time. That said, I think hip hop, when it emerged in the 1970s, had a kind of parallel track with disco in so many ways, and a lot of those early hip hop records were built off of disco. But then it was also kind of anti-disco too, and disco as a form is something we need to go back and look at and really rethink, because it was a form that, for all its faults and problems and so on, you know, was also a liberating space for a lot of people. It was a kind of multicultural form that did prioritize black women in particular. So think of the queen of disco, you immediately think Gloria Gaynor, Donna Summer, or Sylvester, if you'd like to call him queen of disco, as he called himself. But also not just, you know, not just women, period, but also plus-size women, right? Like thinking of 2 Tons of Fun, unfortunate name, but nonetheless, the work that they did was really incredible. And then you have MTV come along, right? And then it basically says, you know, we only want one monotypical body type. This is how you have to look. This is what, you know, wouldn't even allow black performers on MTV, right, in its first year or two until Michael Jackson came along. And so I think there's a lot of ways in which hip hop was constructed as this space for men. It was a patriarchal space. It was a space where men, you know, ruled, and women were marginalized, but not just women. Everything related to the feminine was marginalized: vulnerability and tenderness and expressiveness and so on. And it took a long time for those things to come back into hip hop culture in a mainstream, major way. So I think when you look at that history, well, let me just say that even despite that history and despite homophobia in hip hop, there was always this other history too that's going on, which I think Shanté has really laid out amazingly in the new book. And that is, you know, there were people who were kind of offering this counter narrative and doing stuff all along. So where are the, like, Kevin Aviance? How do we factor Kevin into the history of 1990s and post 1990s hip hop? Man Parrish in the early, you know, in the 80s doing this work. There are a lot of figures who deserve a second look because they were instrumental to the development of hip hop, even at a time of intense homophobia, really, really intense homophobia.
Yeah, I think there's something, you know, it's so funny. This question has been asked for 20 years. I've been answering this question for 20 years. And I think, you know, what I've seen, what really crystallizes for me now is like how anti-black that question is, right? Because it puts the onus, particularly in this moment where the laws that are being, and the bills that are being proposed against queer and trans people are so violent. You know, like one in Louisiana that's proposing to put people in jail for 10 years for transitioning if they're minors. I mean, what does hip hop have on something like that, you know? Or what does hip hop have on something like, you know, the number of states where you can still lose your job for being gay or trans, you know, openly. But I think there's something about connecting black men, in particular, to homophobia that is still very delicious for like the like in a like kind of white supremacist culture. And I think one of the things that hip hop music, particularly rap, and rappers in general do is there are two kind of ways of communicating, two major ways of communicating. One is, you know, move in silence, like the G and lasagna or whatever, the kind of way, you know, you don't tell people what you're doing. But another is you say what's on your mind. And I think that kind of like unfiltered and sometimes really disturbing speech doesn't have an easy it doesn't have an easy fix. It's not like, oh, well, that person's horrible, and now I can't listen to them, even though they may say horrible things, or even though they may say things that are upsetting. That's been my own experience. I always tell this story that, for a couple years when I was in college, I was like, oh, fuck hip hop, it's just so homophobic and sexist. And then the music that brought me back to hip hop was Jay-Z and Biggie. Like 1990s Jay-Z, right? And, Ready to Die Biggie. And I think it has to do a lot with the way that, for me at least, hip hop music and the artists, really, hip hop has saved my life so much, like in terms of as a worldview, as a community, as a place where even though it's homophobic, I could still go to Cyphers and perform. And have conversations, people who literally be saying F the F word and all this stuff. And then afterwards, I'd be like, I remember going to this guy afterwards and saying, hey, what's going on? And it turns out, I know this is simplistic. He's like, my masculinity has been challenged so much because I have long hair, because I'm short. And he's like, I know this is a defensive posture, but it's a way that it gets me points with other dudes in Cyphers, So I think there's complexity there that often isn't afforded to Black people in the same way it's afforded. No one's saying like, we're gonna boycott, what's his name? Jason Bourne, Matt Damon, just up until like a few months ago, his 13-year-old daughter had told him that it was a slur to say, F-A-G-G-O-T, right? And everyone was like, he, but that's Hollywood, right? And so, anyway, I think I remember those turning points. We were talking about the late to mid 90s as this real turning point in hip hop's history. But, another person who was supposed to be in this panel was Scott Paulson Bryan, and talking about the Source, right? So the Source was already this gay place, hip hop magazine.
Emil Wilbekin,
right? And Scott Paulson Bryan. And I think there is a way that in the U.S. and maybe even globally that LGBTQ has been associated with whiteness, but at the same time, we all grew up knowing, besides ourselves, other gay and trans people. So it's not like we had to look for them in white community. Like, let me go find a gay.
Yeah, I love what Jason said about always already there, right?
Yeah.
And this idea that sometimes when we're thinking about homophobia, we're using sort of a white lens to sort of evaluate. And so many of the times that I've stepped into Cyphers with other brothers, it's like, well, that's just what I say. But like, yeah, I just was at my aunt and her partner's house eating chicken last night, right? And so what we call homophobia, right, is often about this performative gesturing of, F the F, right? But it's not about how I live my life. And I'm concerned about the people that are raising hundreds of thousands of dollars to take away my rights.
On that note, I just want to thank everyone on the panel, Nia, Jason, Ms.Boogie, Timum. I want to thank our studio audience, and I want to thank our live stream audience, and I do want to just quickly say you can buy my book, Hip Hop Heresies, and there is a 30% off. You can pre-order it. It comes out June 28th. There will be a book launch at the Strand on July 5th. So thank you all.
Thank you, Shanté.
That's my brother. That's my brother. Said buy the book.
Yeah, let's give it up one more time for everyone on the panel. We have Nia Witherspoon, Jason King, Shanté Smalls, Ms.Boogie, Tim M. West, and just one more announcement. Please do mark your calendars for June 19th, which will be the next event in the Park Avenue's Making Space public program. We will open our doors for the Archer Ames Lost and Found retrospective, which is a critical fabulation by Carl Hancock Rux, featuring a performance by mezzo-soprano Alicia Hall-Moran and pianist Aaron Deal. And this is a collaboration with Harlem Stage and Lincoln Center, and the event is free with advanced reservation. So again, please, thank you for being here, and see you next time.